topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the hosts and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
Welcome to the Ask the Expert show on W4CY Radio and Talk4 TV, where we bring you educational information from top local experts in the fields of legal, health, financial, and home improvement. Now sit back and listen to experts in family law, association law, hearing loss, business brokers, home care, along with many other topics. Now here are your hosts, Steve-O and Sophia.
Hey, good afternoon, Tampa. Welcome to another Ask the Expert show where we bring you the top experts in the field of legal, health, financial, and home improvement. Oh, do we have a great show for you today. Our most popular show is with K. Bender Rimbaum. They are our community association law firm. They have offices in Pompano, West Palm Beach, Tampa, Orlando, and we're targeting Tampa today. We've got such a great guest from K. Bender Rimbaum. Let me introduce you to Kirsten Henza.
Hello, everyone.
Hi, Kirsten.
Hi, Steve.
I'm glad you're here. You know, I butchered your name last time. I just found out it's pronounced Henza. Is that right?
That's correct. It's German. The E is a little deceiving. It is. So the E sounds more like an A, Henza.
Well, all I know is you did a great job last time you're on. We have you again. In fact, you're going to be doing all of our Tampa shows, which is really exciting. And oh my God, did we get a lot of questions. But let me tell everybody, first of all, you can either send us questions, which most of our questions come in by text to 954-336-3767. If you would like to call into the show, the phone number here is 561-623-9429. Or if you're watching us on TV, we have a chat box that you can write your questions in. So many ways, if you've got questions on community association law, condo, HOA, and there's so many changes going on, and we'll be talking about those today. But first of all, Kirsten, tell everybody about your background.
Sure. Well, I'm a Florida licensed attorney. I've been practicing with K. Bender Rimbaum since 2010.
Wow.
In the Pompano office. My family and I then relocated to Georgia because my husband found a position in Georgia. And I still remained working with the firm for another almost 7 years from Georgia. And then I recently was elevated to a position of member of the firm and managing attorney for the Tampa office. So just recently relocated to Tampa, Florida, which we love.
Yeah, it's beautiful there. So let's get started. We've got so many questions that have come in. Let's start off with the text questions. This is from Jack in Tampa. Can more than one or two board members serve on a committee such as landscape committee? Anything other than the finding committee? I didn't even know there was a landscape committee.
Well, I suppose that's in the event that a board of directors decided to create such a committee. It's certainly not governed by the statute. Okay. I think Jack is correct. If we're talking about a fining or suspension committee, whether it's condo or an HOA, then the statute specifically says that members of that committee cannot be directors or officers or employees or anyone residing with these individuals. But if we're talking about any other committee, such as a landscape committee, you'd have to really look at the governing documents, specifically your bylaws, to see if there's any specific qualification requirements to be a committee member. I suspect not, but whether a director or an officer can be a member of that committee, that is something that would be dictated, by the bylaws in this case.
Christian, we have gotten so many emails from people who are residents here locally, Tampa, even actually all over. And everybody's scared. Everybody's worried about what's going on, because especially with 55 and older communities, a lot of people there live on a fixed expense, and not the fault of the board at all, but rates, everything is going sky high. I know the insurance is going up. Well, that's because there's so many homeowners insurance companies going out of business or moving out of Florida. But is there anything you can say to these residents that had been living on a fixed income and now things have really jumped? But I want you just to let people know it's not the fault of the board.
No, I mean, it's not. And unfortunately, I think, the tragic events of Surfside kind of prompted a lot of this most of this new legislation with the milestone inspections and the structural integrity reserve studies, which is what really is, making it more costly for these residents, especially fixed income. The expense that they're going to have to incur now with, hiring engineers and, funding these reserves. But, certainly it's not the fault of the board. In fact, it's a fiduciary obligation of the board to now have to comply with all these statutory requirements.
Well, here, let's go to Jill in Brandon. An association receives their milestone inspection report. Is the work required to be completed within 180 days?
It's a loaded question. I think we need to kind of deconstruct the question. So the milestone inspection comes in two phases, right? So there's the phase one, and then there's the phase two. And the phase one of the milestone inspection is a visual inspection that has to be performed by a licensed engineer or architect, licensed in the state of Florida. And it's an inspection, of the structural components of the building, the habitable and non-habitable portions of the building. Now, that phase one of the milestone inspection has to be completed within 180 days from the date that the association receives a notice from the local governmental agency that you are required to do this milestone inspection. Okay? So if you receive that notice, the phase one is due within 180 days from receipt of that notice. Okay.
Okay, so that's the notice part.
That's the first phase, right? So then phase two, you're only required to do the phase two, okay, which is, a more detailed inspection, if you will. And you only have to do that if the licensed engineer or architect identifies substantial structural deterioration in any building component based on his initial visual inspection. Okay, so if your engineer or architect does not identify substantial structural deterioration in your building, then you don't move on to phase two. If you have to do the phase two milestone inspection, okay, then within 180 days of submitting the phase one inspection report, your engineer or your architect okay, who's doing the phase 2, then has to submit a progress report to the local enforcement agency, letting them know of the timeline for completing the phase 2 inspection. Okay. If in fact repairs are then required as per the second phase of the milestone inspection, okay, then what the statute says is that your local governmental body or agency can adopt an ordinance requiring the association to commence repairs within a certain time frame, okay, after the local agency receives the phase 2 inspection report. However, the statute specifically says that those repairs have to be commenced within 365 days after receiving the report. So the repairs have to be at least commenced within 365 days of receiving that phase 2 inspection report.
Okay.
Now, for those, I don't know if we have any listeners here from, Miami-Dade or Broward County. I know some listeners are from all over the place.
We will tomorrow.
Okay, but in case we have seen, and I'm not aware that this has happened in Hillsborough County or neighboring counties, but we have seen in southeastern counties of the state where your local municipal agencies, your building departments are sending notices to associations saying, hey, your milestone inspection is due. And in fact, it's giving them a smaller time frame within which to complete at least the initial inspection part. So just be aware that if you receive a notice, it's quite possible that it might have a smaller time frame. I don't know if that was the intent of the statute, that the local agencies can sort of modify the time frame within which at least the initial inspection report is due, but that's what we've been seeing.
Kirsten, we seem to be getting a lot of questions asked about how far back they can go about repairs. One of the properties was upset because they got a $10 million assessment, and they noticed that several of the things on the list were like 8, 9, 10, 11 years old. Well, they got to be fixed, but that was a complaint that they had, that they're now going back too far.
Well, I mean, that's certainly a discussion, I think, with your engineer or your architect. I mean,
okay,
this is why they're doing this. I think Broward and Miami-Dade are the only 2 counties in the state of Florida that even required any form of inspection, which was known as the 40-year inspection. I'm not aware of any other county in the state of Florida that requires these inspections. So I'm not surprised if now these milestone inspections are uncovering, deterioration and issues dating back to 10, 15 years back. So I think if your engineer identifies issues and you move on to phase 2, and then that report indicates that you need to do repairs, then you need to do your repairs.
Carson, are there enough architects and engineers to take care of all these properties? They're going to be busy.
I think so. I think the important thing here is that, and in fact, the statute provides that your local governmental agency can, extend the deadline by which you can, by which you have to provide your initial milestone inspection, but the extension request has to be based on good cause, and you have to have a contract in place with the engineer or architect. So even if the inspection report can't be done right away because there might not be enough engineers or they're, very busy, whatever the case might be, at least try to get a contract in place for that milestone.
Kirsten, what's the number one question your clients are calling you up with?
I mean, many, but I think, structural integrity reserve study is probably at the top of the list.
Yes.
especially with the requirement now to, to have that reserve study done within a certain time frame, and then, to fund those reserves.
Yeah, I've had many emails coming, but what if we can't fund the reserves? And I really want people to understand that a lot of they're blaming the board, and it's not the board's doing.
Right.
And you're able to shed some light on that. Let's go to Jeff. For an association to have something like a movie night under the stars, and there it is, it's popped up for you. What legal items must be shored up first to keep the association out of trouble?
I assume items like licensing. Well, I think it's it's a very general question, but I think I have to assume for purposes of this question that this is the association hosting this movie night for the residents and using association funds. So, the most important thing is, when you're using association funds, there has to be specific authority in the governing documents, right? You can't just use association funds for, hosting a movie night, having a Halloween party. Okay, there has to be specific authority. Typically, the authority is to use association funds only in connection with the operation of the association and the maintenance of the common elements. So, the first thing is look at your governing documents and see if you have the ability to spend association funds for recreational activities, such as, hosting a movie night. And if not, we recommend our clients to amend their governing documents to give them that authority, because what could happen is that any other owner could potentially, challenge the use of association funds, as being inappropriate.
Okay.
So
Let me go back now to our text. A meeting to approve material alterations ended in a tie. Count of votes announced and meeting was adjourned. Is there still an opportunity to extend the voting if the motion was not made at the meeting?
I want to kind of go back to the gentleman or the caller that just asked this question about hosting the movie night. I think he had typed in something else there.
Okay.
What if that item was, a line item on the budget? I don't know that that's enough that expenditure was, a line item on a budget that's approved by the board. If you don't have sufficient authority in your governing documents to spend association funds for that purpose, then it's not authorized, even if it's on the budget or not. Okay, so just check for that governing authority. And if you don't, I wouldn't suggest or recommend you use association funds to host movie night. So that's all I'm going to say about that. All right, could you go back and repeat the question about the material alteration?
Craig in Tampa, a meeting to approve material alterations ended in a tie. Count of votes announced and meeting was adjourned. Is there still an opportunity to extend the voting if the motion was not made at the meeting?
Well, first, I'm not sure how there would be a tie on a material alteration vote. Let's say, the association is trying to, repaint their building, the condominium building, and they have two color choices. We don't recommend that you put both choices on a ballot. Do you want to paint the building, beige, or do you want to paint the building, pink? Because that is going to split the vote. That's probably what happened here. They have two choices, and then the membership just, voted for one or the other. So you got 50-50 split.
That's how you ended up with a tie.
Right. So I think to avoid that, the board needs to first, decide on between themselves what is the selection that they want to present to the membership to vote. Pink or beige. And then once they've made that decision, then the question that should be posted on the ballot to the membership is, do you agree or do you want to paint the building beige? And prior to that, the board can have, meetings, town hall style meetings with the membership where they can discuss color selection and maybe even informally survey the community to see, do they have more a preference for pink or do they prefer the beige? And then once they've done this informal surveying, then present the formal ballot with just, one color selection or one material alteration choice. But in this case, okay, so they got the tide, and it sounds like the meeting was adjourned. So when a meeting is adjourned, then that ends the meeting, and you can't use a proxy, right? So the proxy is good for 90 days from the date of the initial meeting, right? So let's say on the date of the meeting, they didn't receive enough votes. One option would have been to recess and reconvene the meeting. And you can do that as many times as the board wants to, up to that 90-day time frame. Okay. But once you adjourn the meeting, that ends, that vote. So you'd have to start the whole process again. And this time I would recommend just putting one, color selection or one alteration choice on the ballot.
Okay, let's go to Sandra. What if the same number of votes are in favor and against the material alterations, i.e. 30 in favor, 30 against? You get a tie. I guess they're showing us how you would get a tie, but I understand your answer. That would make sense. They're offering them two different ways to vote, and you could get a tie that way.
Yeah, I mean,
it makes more sense offering one color of paint.
Yeah, I mean, I think, the statute says the vote that you need for material alteration is 75% of the voting interest unless your documents provide otherwise. So, check your governing documents. If you did meet this threshold, then you'd have to resubmit that vote to the membership with one choice this time.
I think it must be time for boards to be elected now. Are elections coming up for a lot of the associations?
Sure. We're about to enter that election season. Very busy. And it kind of goes through, I think, beginning of the year, through spring, really.
I know this is not really a legal question, but it seems like there's a lot of people wanting to run for the first time. Can you give any suggestions of people who are running for the board, what they should do maybe to help them?
Well, I mean, I think if you've already been...
Here's Brad in Tampa. He wants to know, do you have to be an owner to run for the board?
Well, the statute, neither the condo nor the HOA statute specifically require ownership, as a qualification to run for the board. So, that's something that is very specific to your community. In my experience, most documents do require directors to be owners, but that might not be the case. So I would check your governing documents. But, there are a couple of items in, the condo and the HOA statute that could disqualify, an individual from, running or serving on the board. For example, in a condominium association, if you are delinquent on your assessments, as of the date by which you have to submit your notice of intent to run, which is about 40 days prior to your election, then you can't even you can't have your name placed on the ballot. So that would disqualify you, even if you are an owner. If you have a felony conviction, you can't, serve on the board unless your civil rights have been restored for at least 5 years. If, for example, in a condominium that has a residential condominium with more than 10 units, co-owners can't serve on the board at the same time. Unless, of course, they own multiple units or there are not enough candidates, to serve on the board. And then for HOAs also, if a candidate is delinquent on their assessments, or really for HOAs, any monetary obligation, that could disqualify the candidate as well.
What about certification? Do you have to be certified before you run?
No, the certification would come in, within 90 days of being elected or appointed to the board for condos or for HOAs. Then that's when you have to do either attend a class that's approved by the division to be certified to serve on the board, or in the alternative, you can read your governing documents and then sign a certificate basically affirming that you have read your governing documents and that you will, to the best of your ability, try to uphold them. So those are your options. And that's within 90 days of being appointed or elected to the board. And I might add, the other good thing is that once you are appointed or elected to the board, you don't have to do this as long as you serve consecutively. Now,
Okay.
if you've served on the board for 3 years and then you get off the board and then you get on the board again, you're elected or appointed, 2 years later, you still have that requirement.
Here's Barbara in St. Petersburg. Our bylaws state directors can be removed if they are no longer a member. Is this really true?
Well, that's, that's a very document specific thing. It's possible that the bylaws say that, if you are required to be an owner to serve on the board, to be a director, and you sell your unit, then you no longer qualify. And by virtue of selling your unit, you're basically, removed from the board. It's quite possible, but again, it's something, you have to look at your governing documents.
Ashby is in the Cove. Are you considered an owner if the deed to the property is only in your spouse's name?
That's interesting.
Are you considered an owner if the deed to the property is only in your spouse's name?
Typically, no. And that's a very general statement because typically, right, the owner is whoever holds record title, which is the individual that's identified on the deed that is recorded in the public records, right? So if John Smith is the individual identified in the deed as the grantor, right, the buyer, then John Smith is the record owner, right? Not the spouse. Now, that's not to say that the bylaw, it's quite possible that the bylaws might say that, if we're talking about qualifications to run or serve on the board, it might say that the spouse of a record owner also qualifies to run for the board. Okay. So, that depends on your governing documents.
Okay. Hey, it's time to go to a break. Kirsten, give Ryan the number that's good for all your locations across Florida.
Sure. We have 2 numbers. You can call 954-928-0680. And even though that number will get you the Pompano Beach office, with a click of a button, the receptionist can direct you to any of our other offices. Or we have an 800 number. I don't know that one by memory. It's 800-974-0680.
Okay. And the website is kbrlegal.com. A lot of great information on your website. We're going to go to a break, our first break. Come back. We got more with Kay Bender Rimbaum. We'll be right back.
Kay Bender Rimbaum is a full-service community association law firm dedicated to the representation of community associations throughout Florida. On kbrlegal.com, you can learn more about their offices in Pompano Beach, Palm Beach Gardens, Orlando, Tampa, as well as throughout Miami-Dade by appointment. Several Kay Bender Rimbaum attorneys are board-certified specialists in condominium and plan development law and assist clients with all matters of community association legal issues while keeping them up to date on new developments that affect their associations. Kay Bender Rimbaum is also a well-known provider of free legal education for managers and board members. Contact Kay Bender Rimbaum today by calling 800-974-0680. That's 800-974-0680 to reach any of their locations. You can also visit them online at kbrlegal.com or write to them at info@kbrlegal.com.
And we are back with the Ask the Expert show on W4CY Radio and Talk4 TV with your hosts, Steve-O, Sophia, and their expert guests.
And yes, we are back. This is the Ask the Expert show. We bring you the top experts in the areas of legal, health, financial, and home improvement. We do our show on last Thursday, and the first Thursday of the different offices in Kay Bender Rimbaum. I had to go have some health work done, so we missed it. We're making up for it today. We appreciate you tuning in, your questions. We're here with attorney Kirsten. And I got to tell you, we love your questions. Thank you so much. Keep writing us. If you'd like to call into the show, the phone number here is 561-623-9429. You can also text us, 954-336-3767. Or like most people do, they just write on the chat line on the show. Kirsten, let's go to our next question. And let's see. Can you remind everyone that the new rules on dogs does not apply to HOAs that already have the ban on specific dogs in their declarations? I didn't know there were any new rules.
I'm not quite sure what she means by new rules and dogs. Are we talking about, fair housing and assistance animals and, those types of rules? And by the way,
I know what it is. They're only allowed to go to the restroom at 2:00 in the afternoons. Other than that, they're in bad luck. I don't know what they mean by that. I'm sorry.
No, if we're talking about, fair housing laws as they apply to assistance animals, then, those apply to all community associations because, right, we're talking about assistance animals. We're not talking about, pets, assistance animals or service animals. They're not pets. And by the way, we have a whole seminar or course that we do teach on Fair Housing Act and reasonable accommodations. So if this community has something in the declaration that bans either pets or bans certain breeds of dogs, and you have an owner that is requesting an accommodation to have a service or assistance animal, then provided that individual has properly documented, substantiated their request for accommodation, then the association would have to accept that animal, even if, for example, it's a breed that's already prohibited in the declaration. Okay, so these pet rules, dog rules would not necessarily apply in this case.
Here's something I've never heard of, Kirsten. It says special assessment condo. Can you explain HO8 insurance?
Not sure if they mean like HO6 insurance on their unit, which is a little different from, association insurance. So, association insurance would cover, the common elements, the roof, structure, windows. HO6 coverage is basically for drywall in, and covers, personal property, and I believe it also might cover even the liability of the owner. Okay, but it's important to note that Condominium Act does not require owners to maintain this insurance coverage. It's not something that's in the statute unless your governing documents specifically require owners to maintain that coverage. And not many of the older buildings, older declarations require that coverage. So if this is something that, the board wants owners to maintain this coverage, that the only way to really require owners to do that is to amend your governing documents to specifically say owners must carry this coverage.
Okay, let's go to Greg, Land O'Lakes. Love your butter. Our board has 7 board members and 1 is moving. That leaves us with 6 board members. What do we do now?
Well, that's a good question, because it sounds like you're going to be at an impasse.
Especially if they're dealing with paint colors.
Yeah, exactly. I if there's a vacancy, I assume the board consists of 7 directors. Check your governing documents. Yes. I would say start with there. See what is the required size of the board. Is it 7? Maybe you can actually have a board of 9 directors. Maybe you can actually increase the size of the board. But if it's only 7, I would say try to fill the vacancy. The remaining directors can fill the vacancy to avoid this impasse. Otherwise, especially if you have a very vocal board, it might be very difficult to, conduct business and make decisions. So
I would here's another question, Kirsten, about people moving away, people not owning property. This is from Sherwin in St. Petersburg. I'm a director on our board. The VP moved up to president, but he too moved. Can he still stay on even though he isn't a unit owner?
Well, it's a there's almost 2 parts to this question. Well, first of all, a vice president is an officer. So let me just kind of draw that distinction. We have directors and then we have officers. And your officers are your president, vice president, treasurer, and director. The members elect the directors, and then the directors appoint the officers, right? Then you have to look at your documents, your bylaws. Do the bylaws require directors to be owners? Okay, assuming yes, that means you have to own title. You have to own the unit to serve on the board. But a question apart from that is, do the officers have to be directors? In other words, do the officers also have to be owners? And that's not necessarily the case. Again, that really depends on your governing document. So if the vice president is not required to be a director, in other words, he doesn't need to own title to a unit to serve as a vice president, and he moves away, then he might be good. But if he is required to be a director owner, then he's basically disqualified. He can't serve on the board, and you have a vacancy.
Okay. This is from George in Orlando. He said, I do the document inspection approximately once a year because the board does not hold meetings. They vote by email and PM. Last year, 20 days late providing dates. I don't know if that makes sense. They're almost late now. Second request. I don't understand the question. Does this mean anything to you?
I don't either. I'm just going to kind of extrapolate a couple of points.
We try to tell them to be short. Sometimes we overdo it, Kirsten.
A couple of things that kind of stood out for me from the question. He's saying the board doesn't conduct open meetings, and so he has to conduct records inspection to review records in order to figure out what the board has done in the course of certain time period. Well, obviously, the board cannot vote by email, so that's problematic.
Right.
The board has, and this is both condo and HOAs, they do have the option to vote by written resolution in lieu of holding meetings. And that is basically, instead of holding a meeting, a board signs a resolution as to the action they're taking, right? And that would only be okay if 100% of the board members signed that resolution. And that might work for certain time-sensitive things if you have to approve a contract right away or, there's an emergency. But it's not necessarily something that the board should do as a habit, right? They should still meet with proper notice in advance, posted of the meeting, and discuss whatever agenda items before actually voting so that the membership is aware. So that's kind of the first thing. I guess in terms of his records inspection, make sure you make your records inspection in writing, that you request to inspect the records and not just request, for the association to give you copies of the records. And, under both statutes, condo and HOA, the inspection has to be conducted, within 10 business days of the association receiving the request. So if they're already at, day 20, and I presume business days, then that's also a potential problem. And the owner could, pursue some legal challenge on the records inspection part.
Okay. We're going to take our last break right now. This is the Ask the Expert Show. We're talking with Kay Bender Rimbaum. And give everybody the phone number at the office.
Yeah, it's 954-928-0680.
And we will be right back.
Kay Bender Rimbaum is a full-service community association law firm dedicated to the representation of community associations throughout Florida. On kbrlegal.com, you can learn more about their offices in Pompano Beach, Palm Beach Gardens, Orlando, Tampa, as well as throughout Miami-Dade by appointment. Several Kay Bender Rimbaum attorneys are board-certified specialists in condominium and plan development law and assist clients with all matters of community association legal issues while keeping them up to date on new developments that affect their associations. Kay Bender Rimbaum is also a well-known provider of free legal education for managers and board members. Contact Kay Bender Rimbaum today by calling 800-974-0680. That's 800-974-0680 to reach any of their locations. You can also visit them online at kbrlegal.com or write to them at info@kbrlegal.com.
And we are back with the Ask the Expert show on W4CY Radio and Talk4 TV with your hosts, Steve-O, Sophia, and their expert guests.
And we are back. This is our probably about our final 5 minutes of the show. This show always goes by so fast. I apologize for all the people that have either called in, written in, that we aren't able to get to everybody. We've got so many people who text us at 954-336-3767. That's actually the best way to get in. You can call. For those of you who want to even get more, tomorrow at 5 o'clock, we will have Ask the Experts on. This will be from the Pompano, the main office, and we have Robert Kay with us tomorrow. Kirsten, we've got a lot more questions. I'm going to see if I can get them in. How do you know if an HOA doesn't or hasn't preserved the original docs? Who would I ask?
Your attorneys, of course.
Good one.
This is where we come in.
Yes.
In fact, I'm assisting a community association right now to revitalize their documents, which is sort of the more complicated process of this. But what this call is referring to is, with homeowner associations, the governing documents are good for 30 years. Okay. And then after that, they expire, basically. And I'm very much simplifying this because this is a very complicated area of the law. But to avoid the expiration of these governing documents, okay, before that 30-year mark, there is action that the board can take without involving the membership, and it can be done at a board meeting, to preserve these documents, okay? And with the assistance of your legal counsel, you can record, a certificate basically saying you are preserving these documents. And once that document is recorded, the documents are good for 30 years. Okay. So, you can try to go on the public records of your county and search by the name of the association, to see if there's been some kind of certificate or affidavit recording to preserve these documents. You can certainly ask your management company to look in the official records, because you should have this as part of the official records of the association. And you can certainly ask your legal counsel to check the public records and confirm. I mean, certainly when we get a new client, for example, the first thing we do is we order a complete set of the governing documents from Attorney's Title to make sure we have all the governing documents and any amendments to those documents. And if it's an HOA, typically the title company will provide any MRTA certificates preserving documents. So that's something we would definitely request right from the onset to make sure. And if you don't preserve your documents, if you don't have this certificate or affidavit recorded in the public records, then what's going to happen is the governing documents expire. And then the only way to revive those documents is to go through this process called revitalization. Unfortunately, that process is much more expensive, and it requires a vote of the membership. Okay. And let's assume you get the vote of the membership, then they still have to be sent to a department in Tallahassee to get the documents approved, and they can at that point get re-recorded in the public record. So it's a much more complicated process to revive documents as opposed to preserving. So for those callers who live in a homeowners association, highly encourage you to check your governing documents, see when they were initially recorded, check if they're still good. If you see they're coming up to their 30-year mark, contact your association legal counsel to get this certificate of preservation recorded in the public records. And if your documents appear to have expired, then definitely contact your legal counsel to start the process of revitalization. Because in fact, the statute was changed several years ago to specifically say that now it is a breach of fiduciary duty for a board not to go through the revitalization process if the documents have expired. So you're potentially exposing yourselves if this is not done properly.
Well, Kirsten, I see now why you're considered one of the smartest attorneys at K. Bender Rimbaum. Great job today. Let's give everybody the phone number again.
954-928-5600. 0680.
And that's good for Pompano, West Palm Beach, Tampa, and also Orlando. Thanks for tuning in this week. We've got so many people who have written us. I'm sorry. I will save these for next time, and we'll see you all next week with more Ask the Experts.
Thanks for tuning in today to the Ask the Expert show on W4CY Radio and Talk4 TV. Tune in next week and every week to hear more from our experts on personal injury, insurance, air condition repairs, estate planning, Medicare, and many other topics in the areas of legal, health, financial, and home improvement. See you next week.